Session 4 briefly discusses the management activities covered during the implementation and control phase. We'd like to learn here how the planning process influences the implementation and control phase. We'd like also to learn the control mechanisms and some tools in monitoring. It would be good to be oriented in the change management and risk assessment frameworks. So here you will see in this graphical presentation that we are now already in the implementation plan, wherein the major responsibility of the manager is to control and monitor the project. Now, project implementation and control phase begins with the project plan. In the execution of the activity or the project, there's a need to execute what is in the plan. As much as possible, there is a need not to deviate in the plan. The goal is to manage and maintain the costs, the resources, the team, and the stakeholders, and also ensure the deliverables are on time. This phase ends when all the work is completed. This will mean that deliverables have been completed, have been delivered in line with the project scope and specifications. Now, there are results generated by the execution of the project. Now, the project manager has to monitor and ensure that the execution complies to the work plan, to the deliverables of the project, which are all acceptable based on the quality metrics agreed with the customers or the stakeholders. Now, this is also the time wherein you need to do a lot of feedbacking activities, information coming from your stakeholders and from your project team, information about the execution performance, wherein once there are problems that occur, you can now do some corrective measures. Now, it will end when final deliverables are met, as I said earlier, and there are prescribed quality standards which are going to be accepted by the customers or the users. So in this slide, you will see our activities that are ongoing during the project implementation phase. To name a few, you have the continuous planning of activities, the fund disbursement and control, manage project performance of the team, solicit proposals and bid quotations, selection of suppliers and vendors, implementation of standards for quality controls and assurance, continuation gathering of information to facilitate forecasting and risk analysis, and documentation of lessons learned. Now, these, as you will see, are all happening at the same time. And in the next slide, you will see here the range of the project implementation, wherein the ICT project managers manage a range of project processes, the disciplines during the project implementation stage. These have to be taken all into account by the project manager, trying to harmonize or trying to conduct all these activities all together. Now, also, the project manager ensures that what is out there in the plan is executed. She manages the human resource, procurement, quality, acceptance, change, communications, the issues, the risk, time and cost. What was agreed upon with the users or customers during the requirements and systems design specifications are now being constructed, taking note of the time, the deliverables expected for every task, and the work components set out in the plan. Managing the implementation phase is directly linked with the control and monitoring mechanisms planned at the outset. In the planning phase, each disciplines are required to have a documented plan. In the planning of time or the scope, the schedule of work, tasks, deliverables, and milestones are set. Here you can use some tools like the PERT CPM and Gantt charts as we have shown them earlier. And here, the time set for the delivery of the work are also set. The costs must be monitored regularly, making sure that the budgets and expenditures are well controlled. Financial procedures must be in place, and this will have to be done from the start. Should changes occur, the changes must be within budget and within the planned cost. That is why it's very important to estimate during the planning time, anticipating also what could be the problems or uncertainties which you can also cost at this time of the implementation phase. In the meanwhile, the project scope must also be protected. Scope creeps must be avoided. What are scope creeps? Scope creeps are changes that are not planned but are considered during the project implementation process. Once you have considered the scope creeps, this will be a formulation of failure, and most likely your project cost and timeline will be affected. Now, the management team must be well coordinated and activities should be monitored. The importance of documentation is emphasized here to ensure that the variances in plans are monitored according to time and cost. Now, the procurement of goods and services must also be well planned during the planning phase. This must be based on documents, terms of reference, for instance, that you will be requiring from vendors and services that you will procure. In the quality of work service, there must be a service level agreement. It must be clear with the vendors. And the vendors must also know what will be the outputs required of their services. Quality management refers to match between what is agreed as quality specification versus what is delivered. Development systems are also important to be installed and tested. The test runs with some issues for users, and these will have to be elevated based on the quality of requirements and specifications agreed upon during the planning and the design stage. Issues must be elevated as well, must be met, and changes must be modified. Or rather, modification must be considered during this part of the execution phase. Now, change management are done in two levels. Those that result from issues in the systems, and the other refer to organizational changes in behavior, work patterns, resulting from the use of new systems, and the use of communication plan will come out handy here, as well as training activities. These are one of the major activities that you must consider and plan so that changes that may happen will always be addressed. The products and services created by the new system, once tested to the delight of the users and stakeholders, must be formally accepted. This has to be given ample time for users to accept the product. The ability of the manager to coordinate an integrated approach of all these activities refer to the integration management. Now, during project implementation, the project manager must attend to all the activities that we have mentioned in order to gather information and track the developments of the project and the project areas. The project manager, during the control and monitoring phase, must continuously review the project processes. This review will be based on the document tracking as well as the regular status reporting of the teams. It's also at this stage that the manager must be tracking changes in the project as well as the risk factors that are posing threats to the project. Tools that are useful to track and monitor activities are review analysis, audits, and variance management. Now, one way of tracking project efficiency and control is through the use of project management templates. Project activities must be well documented, and templates are used to make this easy for the project team. Now, management groups have different schools of thought when it comes to the kinds of templates and approaches to use. These school of thoughts already have pre-designed templates which you can access. At the end of the session, I will show you where we can find these templates. And there will be a list of these websites where you can download information about these templates. Now, the project teams may choose from this various selection of groups and vendors who offer these products. The team may opt to create their own or simply, just not reinventing the wheel, procure a sample of these templates, or rather a product of these templates. Some consulting firms offer their products for free, especially for government, non-government organizations who are not engaged in profit-making ventures. Now, to recall, the logical framework matrix there shows a hierarchy of objectives identified and presented. In progress reporting, from the ground up, what is monitored are first the activities and resources. In the outputs level, the reporting focuses on reviews. The audits at the outcomes level, evaluation, and review are also conducted by external resources. An ex post facto evaluation can be conducted on a long-term basis. Well, as part of the monitoring process, the project manager and team must prepare a report on the physical and financial progress of the project, especially for the stakeholders, those who are providing the resources to support the project implementation in particular. These reports function as information to stakeholders on the progress, constraints encountered, and any significant remedial or supportive action required. It also functions to provide formal, documented record of what has been achieved during the reporting, and those facilitate the future reviews of the evaluation. It also functions to document any change in plans, including budgetary requirements. Promote accountability and transparency, which is one of the issues that we need to address in our project management process. As early as the planning phase, a reporting system can be structured to provide a standard for reporting on project implementation and progress. The reporting plan includes the time when reports are expected. Reports can be done monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually depending on agreements with key stakeholders like your donors. The changes that may occur during the project implementation must be monitored to control and ensure that risks are minimized and mitigated. In this phase, it's important to know the magnitude of changes that will be brought about by the project. Review all the issues elevated by the project team and the users. Check risks and assumptions, so that if there are changes that may be needing to take place and there are behavioral outcomes resulting probably to rejection or acceptance or conditional acceptance of the project. Now this has to be managed. Now we have to understand the change management process in an organization. Consider the framework presented. The reaction to any activity that will be introducing change to the organization must be met with the following: human processes, skills building, leadership and strategy, changes in the structure, provision of resources. Risk factors, events, or conditions that pose threat to the project's survival. Some of the risk factors are technical, business, behavioral, and organizational. As you can see here, in the technical risk factors, you can have the scope creep, change requests, and this will have to be managed by issuing these requests and schedule slips. In the business risks area, controls that you can include will be into the budget area, checking the business case outcomes that are unachievable. In the behavioral risk factors, this will include people performance, resource loss, interference from managers or clients. And organizational risk factors may include stakeholder support and change in management. Now, to assess risk, here are some guide questions. Given the main task of the project, what are the risks? We may anticipate, for instance, what is bound to happen. We can always ask the question, what if? What will make this project not happen? What is the project cost? What happens if the project cost goes overboard? What is the timeline? What happens if the project time is not met? What are the consequences if certain assumptions are wrong? So these are certain things that you can ask yourself during the planning phase. And the next slide, you will see some samples of risks, risk areas, and what could be possibly done to mitigate and avoid these risks. You can add more to this list. And then here you will see in the next slide a risk analysis as part of project control. You will see here in the matrix 4 columns And the first column, you will see here the probability of the risk. Will it be a low risk, medium risk, high risk factor? And the same way for severity, meaning if the problem or the risk factor is actually posing very critical or dangers to the project, it could also be measured as low, medium, or high. Now, 0 will be equivalent to our project assumptions, and 1 will be referring to the mitigation strategy, and 2 would equal mitigation strategy plus contingency plan, and 3 will include mitigation strategy and detailed contingency plan. So that here in the next slide, you will see that you'll see 4 areas. What would be the likelihood or the impact of these risks? On the impact level, it could be of high risk or low risk. And for it or the likelihood to happen, it could be low or high. Now, you will see here if they are major risks, or the one in red, it already shows very critical considerations of this risk factor. And once it's very critical, it would be hard to mitigate this risk factor. Now, that's why it's very important to consider risks in your planning. Okay. Now, risk management measures can include realistic and careful planning, especially in your project objectives, in your costs, in your deadlines. Now, you can also include in mitigation factors or mitigation plans, development of alternative solutions. You can also include risk funds so that when these happen, there's certain money or certain financial budget that can be allocated to address and mitigate risks. You can also secure additional resources or work closely with suppliers and process owners in order for you to avoid or mitigate risks. Here in this next slide is a sample of a risk analysis. Just go through them and find out how this project was able to identify in its plan the outcome areas, the description, the impact, the specific risks, and the mitigation strategies. So you will see here, using the different hierarchy of objectives, the risks are already identified as well as some mitigating factors. So, if you're going to write your risk plan, it will be good that you will come up with a documentation like this.